Mr. Hovenier, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
After separate meetings between Kurti, Vučić and European leaders at the end of October, Scholz, Macron and Meloni stated that Kurti and Vučić made comments indicating readiness to implement the European Association Statute. In the same statement, leaders called on Kosovo to initiate the association establishment process, while Serbia should deliver de facto recognition. Are these requests being implemented, and where do we stand now?
No, I think it's a really important question, and I think you're right to point out that there's been a number of expressions from the international community, including, as you note, the Chancellor of Germany, the President of France, the Prime Minister of Italy, for both countries to implement fully and quickly all of the obligations they've entered into in the basic agreement and in the implementation annex. The United States completely agrees with this. We also think this is a matter of importance and some urgency. With regard to your question, is it being fully implemented? I think the answer is no, not yet. But I also know that work is ongoing with regard to the EU Special Representative, Miroslav Lajčák, and his teams to try to come to a common understanding of how best to implement these agreements. But let there be no mistake, what the United States hopes to see, what we expect to see, is full and complete implementation by both sides of all of their obligations under the basic agreement and under the implementation annex.
As you mentioned, Lajčák has invited chief negotiators to a meeting in Brussels to work on the sequencing plan. Are we close to an agreement on the sequencing plan, indicating an agreement on the steps for implementation?
It's hard for me to say exactly where the negotiations are, because this is for Miroslav Lajčák to do with his team. What I do know is that differences are being narrowed. There was a meeting of chief negotiators not too long ago. My understanding is they got closer to an agreement or to an understanding of how best to implement this agreement. And let me make this point as well. This is a really important objective for both countries. Both countries will benefit enormously from the full and complete implementation of their obligations in the agreement and in the implementation annex. The letter from the leaders you referred to earlier talks about the importance of doing this in a parallel fashion. Kosovo takes a step, at the same time Serbia takes a step. There needs to be this type of parity, and they both need to be taking real action, and in so doing benefit both their countries.
Mr. Ambassador, since your media conference on November 9 stating that the draft statute is constitutional, there have been various statements from state leaders here in Kosovo. For example, the president expressed doubts, mentioning 2 or 3 issues that would cause problems. Do you share this concern?
I'm really glad you asked that question too. So first, I want to be very careful about what it is that I did say. And what I said was the United States fully supports the draft statute that was handed over by EUSR Lajčák and the representatives of Germany, France, Italy, and the United States to the government of Kosovo. I note again the same letter you referred to by the Chancellor of Germany, the President of France, and the Prime Minister of Italy talk about how they completely support and endorse this statute. So this is a pretty extraordinary thing, to have senior political leaders, senior countries all invested in seeing Kosovo advance in its European and Euro-Atlantic trajectory, laying out a way forward and providing a draft statute that would help Kosovo fulfill a critical step that it needs to fulfill, which is the implementation of the association, which we expect to see, just as we expect to see Serbia move forward with fulfilling its obligations under the basic agreement, which in the letter from those leaders referred to as de facto recognition. Now, sorry, I lost the train a little bit on the second part of your question.
About the President expressing doubts that mentioned 2 or 3 issues.
So, you know, it hasn't just been, so first of all, I have had the opportunity to discuss this a few times with President Osmani. And I don't know, I mean, I will let her speak for herself, but I don't know if it's fair to characterize her view as doubts. Rather, I think what I understand her concerns to be is there are ways in which this could potentially be misinterpreted in a manner that would not be consistent with Kosovo's constitution. And as the president, she has the prerogative, of course, both to express those concerns and when it is adopted and then sent to the Constitutional Court for review, which needs to happen, it's part of the process. I think it's my understanding that she, as President of the Republic, also has the opportunity to provide views to the Constitutional Court very correctly. I can only restate the view of the United States government. We believe that any association of Serb majority municipalities that is established needs to meet a number of different criteria. First, It needs to conform with Kosovo's constitution as it is. No constitutional change required. Second, it needs to conform with the previous constitutional court decision related to the Association of Serb Majority Municipalities. There should be no executive authorities. There should be no additional layer of government. So we assess that this draft statute, and our European partners assess that this draft statute, which was provided to the government of Kosovo, meets these criteria, fulfills, is circumscribed in this way. And so we're confident as it goes forward that it can go forward. One last point, which I've also made before, but I think it's really important to repeat. The question of whether this draft statute is constitutional or not can only be actually answered by one body. Certainly not the Ambassador of the United States of America or anyone else. That is the responsibility of the Constitutional Court of Kosovo. So that's why, from our perspective, it's really quite important and urgent that the government finish its process, adopt it, and move it forward to the court so the court can make that determination.
Mr. Ambassador, I believe you saw that the opposition politicians and constitutional experts commented on an unofficial document alleged to be the draft status that suggests autonomy for Serbs in Kosovo. My question for you is this: when will citizens of Republic of Kosovo will see the statute given to the government on October 21?
So first, let me respond to this question of some of the criticism. And as I've talked about before, I'm aware of a number of concerns that have been raised. And, we have enormous sympathy for all of those who want to ensure that the good functioning order of the state of Kosovo, a sovereign independent country, continue to function well. We're not interested as well in being part of a process that puts into place things that would upset the good functioning order of the state of Kosovo. We don't believe this draft statute would do that. And that's a point we have consistently made. I want to note that I was very pleased a number of months ago when some of the leaders in opposition parties made very, very public their concerns that the government of Prime Minister Kurti wasn't perhaps completely in sync with the United States government or our Western allies with regard to dialogue. And they called very publicly for the government of Kosovo to work closely with us and to be aligned with us and to make sure that the things we were asking for became part of the government's positions. I would just say that I hope that continues to be the case. This draft statute was provided by the EU Special Representative and very senior representatives of Germany, France, Italy, and the United States. So my hope would be those who are focused on ensuring good coordination and alignment with the United States, among others, also take that principle with regard to this draft statute and they embrace it and welcome it and help advance it. That's our hope. Now, with regard to when it'll be made available to the public, that's hard for me to say. I'm not the negotiator. That is for Miroslav Lajčák to determine. But I will note it is not uncommon in sensitive negotiations to not make public all the details of a document being dealt with in negotiations, because you have to deal with these things in discretion. And while the public absolutely has great interest in this issue and the right to understand what's going on, sometimes there has to be some patience in letting the negotiations move forward, because they are more fruitful when negotiators can operate in conditions of not having to respond every single day to press or opinion makers who may or may not actually have all the nuances or even the details of the thing under negotiation.
As you saw, the Kosovo government repeatedly declared that the Ohrid Agreement and the draft statute are not applicable without the leaders' signatures. Can there be implementation without signatures? Of
course there can be implementation without signatures. I can again just repeat the position of the United States, and I will also share what I understand to be the position of the EU, although I'm not authorized to speak for the EU. But from the position of the United States as expressed by our Special Envoy for the Western Balkans, Gabriel Escobar, we consider these obligations to be legally binding. And we believe that the leaders entered into this commitment when they agreed to both the basic agreement and the implementation annex. I heard Joseph Borrell say the same thing following the Ohrid negotiations. So for the United States, for the EU, and the EU again subsequently in European Council conclusions included the basic agreement and the implementation annex. They are legally binding and we expect them to be fully implemented. I will note one last time this letter I keep referring to by the Chancellor of Germany, President of France, Prime Minister of Italy. It also says that it's urgent to move forward with a full implementation, without preconditions or without delay, and that issues related to the formalities or the formalization shouldn't distract from the important work of moving forward with a full and complete implementation.
The former EU envoy in Kosovo-Serbia talks, Wolfgang Ischinger, suggests that progress won't be possible before 2024-2025. How do you view this time frame?
I would like to be much more optimistic than that, and I think it's appropriate for us to be more optimistic in that. If you look back over the last year, while there have been a number of challenges, including to the security situation in Kosovo, what we've actually achieved, or what has been achieved in the dialogue, is fairly extraordinary. That in the course of the last year, you have reached agreement on a basic agreement that does a number of positive things for Kosovo. There's provisions in there about respecting one another's borders, sovereign equality of states, recognition of Kosovo documents. There's some very, very positive things there, and this has been agreed. Just as in the implementation annex, there's at least an initial understanding of how best to implement it. We have hard work to do still in coming to a common understanding and an agreement on how to do this difficult parallel implementation so that both sides are taking steps that are more or less equal and at more or less the same time. But a lot has been achieved, and so I'm hopeful that more can be achieved. It's a question of will. And I would not want to wait for the timeline you laid out in your question.
Mr. Ambassador, 2 months now have passed since the terrorist attack in Bojsk-Zvečan. Despite claims from the Kosovo government, Serbia denies responsibility. Is there an ongoing international investigation?
I don't know if I'd say investigation, but certainly the United States and a number of our partners have looked very closely at the information we've received from the government of Kosovo, from other sources, and assessed what happened. And again, we stated very, very publicly early on just what a horrendous act this was, this criminal act that resulted in the murder of a Kosovan police officer, for which I will yet again express the condolences of the United States to the people of Kosovo, but particularly to the Bunyaku family. It should have never happened. We are concluding our assessment of this. We have said consistently that those responsible can, should, must be held accountable, and that continues to be our position. So those who were responsible for this violent attack, for this murder, for this threat to the sovereignty and security of Kosovo need to be held accountable.
During the visit to Belgrade, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg spoke again about the deployment of Serbian Army near the Kosovo border. In your view, does this threat still exist?
We watch very closely a number of things that could be sources of instability in the region. And of course, we've spoken publicly at different times when we were concerned about specific military deployments around the border area. And that continues to be something we watch closely. But I would also say one of the manifestations of how seriously we take this is our long-term commitment to Kosovo's security, most visibly made manifest through the KFOR mission and U.S. participation in it. We believe NATO to be the most successful military alliance in the history of humankind. That's a very, very strong statement to make, but I stand by it. And the fact that you have a NATO mission in Kosovo with a responsibility to ensure a safe and secure environment and to allow for freedom of movement is a very, very powerful indication, commitment by the international community of our commitment to Kosovo's security. And the fact that you have several hundred American soldiers as part of that mission in leadership roles supporting this is another reflection of how seriously the United States takes this. So I still sleep pretty comfortable at night knowing that NATO is there, knowing that there are American soldiers in NATO, and knowing that they are capable of dealing whatever threats to security might emerge.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for your time. It was a pleasure.
It was a pleasure on my part. Thank you.